So any ideas for what to talk about?
Maybe about the saṅkhāras
Mm-hmm.
and the difference between saṅkhāras and cetana.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the difference?
Saṅkhāras are involved with avijja.
Mm-hmm.
Cetanas are more like free from avijja.
Mm-hmm. But can you have cetana without it being a saṅkhāra? Because saṅkhāra just means activity or doing. So how can you have intention or choice without it being an activity?
From my point of view, I cannot step outside of my experience as a whole and see how would it be without avijja.
Right. What do you think it? Like, what do you have to remove? So everybody recognizes that they have saṅkhāras in their experience. Now, whether that's Chaitanya or not, we can put that aside. But what do you need to remove in order for saṅkhāra?
Well, can we? But are we on the same page about what we are talking about when we use the word saṅkhāra to begin with?
Right. So I guess we should verify that first. So usually it's understood as like volitional formations or various kinds of translations that people have come up with, and it usually feels to people, I think, like it's something that's not really in my control. It's something that gets removed kind of indirectly by this practice that I do, that at some point gets rid of the ignorance and somehow also gets rid of the saṅkhāras. But it's actually something that you are active, like it's a doing. Saṅkhāra means doing. And in kind of because these are not like philosophical terms that the Buddha was using with some kind of grandiose significance. It's if you read like Vedic writings and stuff, when they use the word saṅkhāra, they were referring it to like the stuff that they would do, like rituals, like things that they would organize, play out, kind of do, and not as some kind of, I don't know, energies or something. So saṅkhāras have to be seen in that practical sense of things that you are doing, things that you're responsible for. And so from that point of view, what would you have to remove to fix the problem with saṅkhāras, basically? Can you just step out of saṅkhāras from the very beginning?
No.
Uh-huh. So what is the thing that you have to do then?
Understand what saṅkhāra are.
Right, but even before that.
The right view.
Yes, but even before that.
Virtuous and restraint, as it were.
Yeah, in other words, you have to recognize you if you think you can kind of avoid them from the very beginning, you probably have a misconception of what saṅkhāras are. All you can do is cultivate certain kinds of saṅkhāras that don't fuel ignorance. So you have no choice but to do things, in other words. But certain doings will at least not fuel your ignorance further. So that's the first step. You have to recognize that there are wholesome saṅkhāras and unwholesome saṅkhāras. And that, so that's the practice of virtue. And then, on the basis of that, you can get to understand what the cessation of saṅkhāras actually is. So when you have established yourself in good saṅkhāras, quote unquote, good actions, then you can understand the cessation of action altogether. And that's the real gist of it. It's like it's not that you remove ignorance and then you are left, you kind of go from saṅkhāras to cetana, because as the Buddha said, cetana is kamma as well. So, and he also said cessation of suffering is cessation of kamma. In other words, cessation of cetana as well. So, more accurately speaking, cessation of suffering is the cessation of all activities or all doings or all intentions as well. And sometimes even the Buddha would say that when there is intention, when there is cetana by body, speech and mind, as a result of that, suffering arises. So it's the cessation of all of that that constitutes actual freedom from suffering. You cannot have saṅkhāras or cetana and at the same time not have suffering. But of course now then the thing is, it's not a, like it can sound as if, okay, so cessation of all action probably would sound to most people as some kind of a exotic state of just unconsciousness or something. But it's something that you have to actually develop. It's and it's also not something that happens to you. It's something that you understand. So literally, the word understanding refers to knowing something for yourself and knowing how you got there. Not just, oh, I got this experience where there was no doer, no sense of self, but okay, but what do you actually understand there? That's what really matters. And so how then would you, or let's say, first of all, what is the ignorance as a result of which there are saṅkhāras automatically? What are you most acutely not aware of? Instead of just, the five aggregates or some kind of theoretical thing, what are you most acutely not aware of because of which you have saṅkhāras?
Simultaneity. There's something that undermines my attention itself.
Yeah, you could put.
But there will be other factors, I think.
You could put it that way, but even before you can go in that direction, there's something more, even more acute that you need to recognize. Something very simple. Because there's a characteristic of saṅkhāras that's pretty much it's the only reason why they can be there.
Take responsibility for my action.
Yes, but
more precisely,
how would you, what is the precondition for you to take responsibility for an action? A very simple answer.
Precepts.
No, very, very, very direct thing. It's almost like a silly kind of question in a way, but you realize actually it's not.
Just be aware of myself.
Well, yeah, be aware that you're doing something to begin with, because that's it's not some unawareness of something. Again, like you can come up with all sorts of explanations of unawareness of three characteristics and this and that, but really, most primarily, when it comes to saṅkhāras, you're unaware of them to begin with. In other words, you don't recognize that you're actually doing that thing. So yes, as you said, the first step towards doing anything about it would be taking responsibility. But in order to take responsibility for your action, you need to know that it is actually an action, because it's not going to feel like that initially. So, because what we're talking about here is not really just like unwholesome saṅkhāras by body and speech, because as we said, that would have to be abandoned beforehand. So these are now things that, having developed the good saṅkhāras, as I said before, to replace the bad saṅkhāras, you wouldn't even be aware that those saṅkhāras are things that you're doing. So,
which includes mental action.
Yeah, most primarily, it converges at that point, basically, because even when somebody goes into complete state of just vegetable or something, that's the part that can never go away.
Yeah.
On some level, if you are alive, there is some degree of activity.
And that's actually already a good contemplation, to just ask yourself, like, mental action. So instead of just agreeing, oh yeah, there's body, speech and mind, so there must be mental action, but can I make a list of things that I've been mentally doing, mentally doing in the last hour?
Yep.
And you'll find that it is remarkably difficult, because you just completely take for granted that action pertains to let's say body and speech, and you think, well, what's in here is happening to me, but it's not like that.
It's actually it's a very common thing that people would think that the daydreaming kind of happens by itself or something, and then they kind of need to shut it down by watching their breath or something, and actually all that is rooted in just not seeing that is something that you're doing. Because if I don't know, if you're jumping and then you want to stop jumping, do you have to watch your breath in order to stop jumping? No, you stop jumping. So the same thing is on the mental level, exactly the same principle, but because the person hasn't developed themselves sufficiently in restraining the actions of body and speech, and the action of the mind feels like it's nebulous thing that almost doesn't exist. Some people would even say that their thoughts are not real or something. So it's actually like, that's the first step. You need to actually recognize, oh, I am actually doing this. And all of the prerequisites of the graduate training are geared towards making that apparent. Like, having developed yourself in the precepts and sense restraint and all these things, when you're in seclusion, it would become very hard to ignore. Obviously for a while, not just like one day or something. But if that becomes your mode or your lifestyle, it would be very hard not to become aware that the daydreaming is actually something that you're doing. Because even if in the beginning it feels like it's coming by itself, once you've been left alone for a while and haven't been distracting yourself, you will start to realize, actually, I am kind of actively fueling this, and when it stops, I restart it, and I kind of, I'm literally responsible for it. And then you will start to see, oh, actually, that is a saṅkhāra, that it was arising solely because I was ignorant of it. And furthermore, also, if you want to take the textbook definition, it's also ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. So all saṅkhāras ultimately kind of, even if it's not a coarse kind, it's gonna be coming out of craving. And so not seeing that it is actually painful, not seeing that it is actually, like, you will be projected onto the objective of your daydreaming, like the thing I want to get or the thing I want to get rid of or whatever, and you kind of carry the view that that's not having accomplished that is the reason for your pain, ignoring the fact that it's the craving right then and there that's actually causing the pain. So not seeing that craving is suffering gives rise to that saṅkhāra automatically. So it doesn't have to be that, oh, I believe that I have to solve this problem or something. No, it's just ignoring the fact that it's the craving. First of all, that the craving is there, and second of all, that it's the craving that is the actual root of suffering. Automatically, you give rise to saṅkhāras. Why? You're trying to resolve the pain, which, if you realize, oh, actually, it's the craving, to resolve the pain, not the pain, that's the suffering, what purpose would any effort of doing have? So that's why cessation of saṅkhāras, again, is not a mystical thing. It's literally just when you don't have any further need to get rid of to get rid of pain or pursue pleasure. It's as concrete as that, because every saṅkhāra converges around not wanting to endure whatever is there.
And so all the actions that were previously tainted by craving, by body, speech and mind, would cease.
Well, yeah, action as a phenomenon in and of itself, that would have to cease as well, because I mean that's why even in the suttas you wouldn't see actually a definition of saying that an arahant kind of has a pure 5 aggregate or something, because that would mean saying that they still have saṅkhāras, and Nibbāna is the cessation of saṅkhāras itself and defined.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a contradiction. But then you realize, so how can you have like that's when you realize that it's a very literal statement when the Buddha says that it's not that it's only cetana that is kamma. You would think, oh yeah, of course. But no, it means that like physical movements, verbal movements, even mental movements in and of themselves are not what kamma is. It's the intending, the kind of directing or inclining towards things, that is the kamma. If there's no inclining, actually I think there's a sutta that says when one is dependent, one is moved. When one is moved, one inclines. And as a result of inclining, there is coming and going.
Yeah.
And with coming and going, there is sickness, aging, death. Birth, sickness, aging, death. So it's that kind of, it's as simple as that. It's cetana. It's not just like I decide to do something and I kind of manifest it out into the world. Initially, of course, that's going to feel like that, and when you start keeping the precepts and restraining your actions, you're going to start to see that was kind of the very last outpour of the river, like the last part, basically. But it's really just inclining towards something, having that kind of directionality in your experience. And when ignorance is abandoned, again, in the very concrete terms, when there is pleasure and there is no directionality, no inclining towards needing to have more of it, then there's no cetana. If there's no inclining towards needing to have less pain, there's no cetana. And then you could say, okay, well, it's only to the extent that like nothing that you would do would be rooted in, like that's factually when you would have no self, in the sense of an outside kind of thing that's trying to puppet stuff around to kind of get what it wants. But you arrive at it indirectly through that non-inclination, rather than like deciding beforehand that you will deny your sense of control, rooted in your sense of control that just wants to get rid of things. So it's that sense of self, that sense of I, is a side effect of that inclination to control things, rather than being some kind of metaphysical entity that you destroy or something. So then that's where you need to look for the saṅkhāras in relation to pleasure and pain, because that's where the activation, where the inclination comes to be. in relation to the things that you want to do, that your mind is pressured to do, that's where you calm the saṅkhāras, not in relation to kind of everywhere or nowhere. It's when you have contained yourself by the precepts, you will naturally, whether you like it or not, unless you're distracting yourself with some kind of oblivion practice, you will start to notice that your mind is inclining towards certain things. It's inevitable. And that's where you need to then start understanding, okay, how do I cut this off at the root, rather than replacing it with something else, which is going to be another activity, or kind of thinking to counter it, or just looking away. All of those are going to be activities. Instead, you need to find, how do I go to the very root of this whole inclination, of this whole movement of just trying, not trying to do something, just trying as a thing in itself. How do I cut that off? And well, it's exactly through what you said initially. It's through the understanding of dependent origination, quote unquote, where you kind of by recognizing with this is, you kind of remove any space because of which you could assume that you can do something about it. Because all you see is this and this other thing. And then where is the space for me to interfere in between? And that's why it's so important to see it as a simultaneous presence of two things, because for as long as it's like observing the one thing coming and then the next one and then the next one, it's going to be your sense of self that's observing that. And that observation in and of itself is an activity, no matter how subtle it feels. Like you thinking that you're seeing the sequence of mind moments coming and going, that is an activity. So we gave one example of saṅkhāras, which is in the practical level, which would be daydreaming, let's say. Thinking, coarse, sensual thoughts, burst thoughts. So what would be another, can we come up with other examples of, so that it doesn't feel like an abstract thing, of saṅkhāras that you would be doing even when you are already virtuous and established in a certain boundary of conduct?
Wanting something in general.
So what would be the solution to that? Can you just I shouldn't want anything?
Well, that's become what I want now.
So you have to start like that, of course. Otherwise, you won't try, and you will just fall into some sort of abstract idea of, okay, just don't want anything, and that's it. No, you have to start with an activity. In other words, I want to solve this because there's a problem here. But then how? So what would be the solution? Like, how do you?
Yeah, I think it's more kind of what you say, like more or less before, is like instead of kind of myself doing it, like more like discerning that actually, rather I like it or not, I cannot want things to be otherwise than they already are, because it's just me interfering with what determine what I can interfere with, which is kind of a contradiction in itself.
So is it that, like, what practically you would what would you practically discern? Let's say you have wanting of some even neutral kind. How do you see that you cannot interfere? Because again, just telling yourself, "Oh, I cannot interfere," it might be accurate, but unless you actually see the fact that, like, you see it in such a way that even if you wanted to interfere, you see that you can't. how are you able to see that away?
Well, you kind of have to develop the kind of recognition that, I mean, one of the kind of foundation of mindfulness, for example, like just recognizing that, well, the body is like the basis on which I can act, and I can never step outside of that regardless. And just like, not like putting it in the front, like just like looking at that, but just more recognizing like my whole experience is defined by that. And I can never like actually get out of that. As you said at the beginning, Patrick, like say like my experience as a whole is defined by that, regardless. And like just keeping that in mind, but let it sink, not like over rationalizing it, but like just letting it pervade, so to say.
Yeah. So you basically have to recognize that even if you go and, like, you don't deny that whatever it is your mind wants to do, that you could do it. Because that would be kind of just wishful thinking in a way. No, it's like that there is that possibility there. But the fact is, even if I were to actually go and do it, would I ever step outside of this foundation? Actually, you realize no. And then from that perspective, like, you become clear, even when let's say you take the foundation of feeling, even when I actually went and in the past and engaged with sensuality and pursued this and got angry with people and got into fights and stuff, did I ever actually step outside of that feeling that initially got me to act? And you realize, actually, no. It's pretty much every time it actually even got worse. So if you just recognize that, you see, okay, yes, I could act, like I could go and do this, whatever, but from this perspective, I'm not actually moving anywhere. And that's when it ceases to be a saṅkhāra. I think we spoke about that at some point. Like, it's a saṅkhāra not because of the kind of movement of your arms or something. It's a saṅkhāra because there's that assumption that you are actually going somewhere else. Whereas you realize, actually, no, there's anything that's done would have to remain exactly on the same level as where I started from. And then that's what I mean, like, even if you were to go and do it, you don't deny that there is that possibility. It's like, as far as you would possibly be able to go, you will never be able to step outside. You will never actually be able to go anywhere. And that's where that sutta, where the Buddha says, like, the world is to be known within the confines of this fathom-long body, and it's the cessation of the world is found there as well. So in other words, there is nothing outside of it, and anywhere that you would go, you still remain in that same body. Like, and when you, as you said before, when you're daydreaming, when you're having kind of unwholesome thoughts even about this or that, instead of just replacing it with another kind of daydreaming, because that's a funny thing, like, you would kind of imply that if I'm focusing on some specific object, magically that isn't daydreaming anymore, but actually just because it's kind of more moving less or something, but it's exactly still the same assumption of movement, the same assumption of going somewhere else. Instead, you go the other way and you recognize, you undermine the whole possibility, and you see, it doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter what I attend to, it doesn't matter whether I sit, stand, walk, or lie down, I'm not actually going anywhere. And that's in a way, that's probably even an unpleasant recognition, if especially if you're not developed in virtue, because it's like being confined and realizing, like, well, yeah, again, like, it's not even a matter of I am deciding to calm my mind or something. It's like, even if I were to ignore this and go back or whatever,
that recognition will go with you.
I won't ever actually be able to get outside of this.
So you're properly cornered, basically.
Yeah. But at the same time, it is also the most relieving thing of all, because you realize like, oh, so I don't even have to do what I assumed the practice was. Like go here and do this and think about this and remove this or do that. No, it's actually the other direction. It's recognizing that you can't even change anything, even if you want to. But before that, in order to arrive at that point, you, like I said before, you need to have tried and strived and done things on that level of virtue, restraint and stuff, because otherwise you would just be misconceiving what saṅkhāras are based on whatever assumptions and views you carry, and you won't be seeing it concretely in that yoniso sense. Like, right here, what am I actually doing? You instead be imposing whatever you read or heard or thought or reflected saṅkhāras are into your experience, and then that's anything that comes out of that is just going to be another saṅkhāra. I think even, actually, we gave a simile of like, when he referred to that sutta where that people translate as like how to stop thinking, Majjhima 20, he said, how do you calm the activity, the saṅkhāra of thinking? And he said, it's like a person who is running recognizes, why am I running? What if I walk? Then after walking for a while, they recognize, why am I walking? What if I stand? And then it goes all the way down to, okay, so why am I sitting? Let me lie down. And then you realize the whole principle there is that the saṅkhāra is something that the person becomes aware of, like they were previously unaware of, they weren't realizing it. And once they recognize it, they're able to kind of comment or tranquilize it, quote unquote, and then abide in a more refined type of activity. And that's the whole principle. Like, it's, if you don't recognize it, if you don't see exactly what it is that, if you don't see that the whole thing is actually coming from you, it's not being imposed by your mind kind of working on its own or something, it's you choosing to engage with these things that present themselves, and nobody else can come in between. It's you alone. If you don't see that, anything you try to do is still going to be within the same craving. In ignorance as well.
So what you say like now is like, as long as someone doesn't recognize like this principle like to the full extent, he basically didn't took responsibility fully yet. Still kind of assumes that something happened to
exactly. So it's like that is why it is fully like nothing can, like fully irreversible, because if it were that something you kind of concoct and it just came up, you develop this thing and then it sort of stays there for a while, inherently that's going to be impermanent. But if it's you recognizing, oh, I was actually doing this stuff, let me now stop, then who can actually, even if, like, you, let's say you were running and somebody puts a gun to your head and says, start running again. Well, he can't actually force you to run. It would be you who would make a choice not to die and run instead. So nobody can force you to do anything. And in the same way, nobody can force you to engage or to do saṅkhāras. Nobody can force you to have craving. Not even Mara, as the sutta said, like when he was trying to provoke the Buddha, because he said, well, I own the eye, I own the ear, I own all of the six senses. And then the Buddha said, yes, that's true. He didn't say, oh, you're wrong about that. He said, no, that's factually correct. But there is an escape from that, which you don't understand.
Now, is taking responsibility an activity?
it's a fault. So I think yes.
Mm-hmm. So is that something that in the end then also goes with the cessation of saṅkhāra?
Yeah, because I think there is a difference in between like taking responsibility and discerning responsibility.
Yeah, because
It's kind of the
taking already implies something you did. The verb taking. But if you realize, well, I am responsible, like the same principle, I am responsible even if I don't want to be responsible, then it's not you taking responsibility. And ironically, that recognition frees you from the burden of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only reason responsibility was a burden is because you still implied that it was possible to avoid it. And that's the principle with everything. Like, you don't actually fix what you think the problem is. You simply realize that there was no need to fix it in the first place. In terms of getting rid of pain and getting rid of or pursuing pleasure. Of course, initially, like I said, it is a problem if you're engaging in certain actions, like breaking the precept, because as much as you might want to tell yourself through fancy ideas that you can do that without craving, you are actually taking up the entire spectrum of experience just by doing any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be another very pertinent saṅkhāra that would be there when you give up, let's say, the obvious bad saṅkhāras of, let's say the person is taking the precepts and bodily, verbally, and even mentally, they don't engage with sensuality, aversion, or distraction. That, of course, doesn't mean that they're pure already, because then it would take one day to become an arhat. So what is left there? It's still not quite reined in.
But isn't it like the same principle? Like, I am doing all this. Like, I am the one like holding this precept, holding this virtue, holding this sense restraint, and there will be a result out of it. Like, I'm expecting these things.
That is the what it kind of boils down to. But more specifically, what is the kind of what would be the thing that you're still doing when merely having restrained yourself from coarse behaviors, you'd still be kind of wound up.
There would be hindrances, for example.
Sure.
Or just the expectation that there's still something to get that you do not have.
Right, yeah, exactly. But what is it that you would be trying to get that you don't have?
Well, you think that you can get peace if the feeling which is not present is otherwise, for example.
That's basically, yeah. So then you would realize, or still, you would still carry the assumption that the solution to all of this is to replace whatever pressure is there with something else.
Yeah.
And for that reason alone, you're suffering. Like, it's the craving. It's not what you thought you had to resolve. It's always the craving. And that's why the Buddha said, even in the Satipatthana contemplation, he said, when there's a mind with greed, he said, you know the mind of greed is a mind of greed, with greed. And it says, through that practice, you abide disengaged, not taking up anything in the world. He doesn't say that he replaces the mind of greed with something else. And because, again, that would be taking it up. You abandon the mind of greed simply to the extent that you don't act out of it.
Yeah.
But then now, if you also carry the opposite activity of still to some tiny extent expecting that it shouldn't be there,
which is part of the greed, actually.
Yeah,
that expectation.
That partakes in the same thing.
Yeah.
And ironically, then through the craving, like it's because of the craving that that greed is there. So by feeling the craving, whether it's towards or against, you're fueling the basis for greed. And so even if you did actually get rid of it somehow, through whatever means, the fact that you still cultivated craving, that's precisely what's going to make it arise again. Even if you feel victorious or whatever because you succeeded in removing it, that's still pretty much the same principle of sensuality. Like I just have this thing, push it away with something better, and feel satisfied as a result of that. But it is quite a hard thing for people to accept because all the views are about countering and finding a quick solution for the problem, and then you don't realize actually that middle way that the Buddha described is a much more subtle thing than just like, don't be too kind of ascetic and don't be too indulgent either. Of course, that's the broad kind of principle that you'll be able to recognize externally, but even that, because the Buddha said, well, some of his disciples would be eating once every 3 days and the other ones would be eating food from the king every day, and wearing silk robes and whatnot. So even on that level, you can't quite say that it's just a external, predefined type of conduct. It is most acutely on that internal level, whether you kind of engage with the bad saṅkhāras or you engage with the good ones, which is the good saṅkhāra is the saṅkhāra of trying to get rid of your sensuality, trying to get rid of your aversion through that sense of like, I want something else, I want this to go away.
Yeah, which eventually also has to cease.
Yeah. So that's the all of the times the Buddha would describe like, the tuning of the strings, the how do you cross the flood? It's by not pushing forward, by not standing still. So all of that converges around that principle. Like you push forward, well, initially, let's say you're not even pushing forward, you're just letting it carry you away, and that's your initial state of everybody as a householder. Just give in, just go with the flow, just go with it. And then, of course, unless you fight it, you won't be able to establish the basis for the middle way, which is the precepts. But at a certain point, you have to realize, wait, now I need to learn how to drop this without going back to just not doing anything at all and letting the flood carry me. So without doing either, that's the cessation of suffering. And that's basically what Siddhavata Paramasa is. Like it's not a thing that's just hidden somewhere in your subconscious. It is like something that will actually be present quite frequently. It's like that tendency to kind of literally hold on to the sense of duty of like, I need to get rid of this, I need to kind of just going beyond. You were at the right point, like you just gave up, you stopped engaging with sensuality, but you keep carrying it further into like out of just that sense of duty. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just
so that momentum has to cease as well, basically.
Yeah, not discerning that actually I already did what I had to do, and then I just keep winding myself up by assuming that there's something more, and overlooking. Just by overlooking the fact that, I was actually right where I had to be, then you just keep going elsewhere.
Yeah, because probably it felt sort of dissatisfying or unpleasant, so you think there's more to be done, rather than to just...
And that goes back to what I said. It's like any sense of what you might assume is what you need to resolve is just going to be a distraction from what the actual problem is, which is right now I am craving against something.
Mm-hmm.
If there's any sense of like, doubt and asking myself, what is it, and feeling overwhelmed or something, all of that can only be because I'm overlooking something that should in a way be obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because of the kind of built-up ignorance, but you realize actually it's right there. It's not as kind of clearly defined as what I'm used to seeing, like objects out there in the world, but it is factually, I am feeling like this. If somebody were to come and ask me, like, how do you feel? You would give the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And right there, in relation to that ambiguous feeling, you are trying to get rid of it. And that's the problem. There cannot be anything else that causes you suffering. So it's just drilling that in, because you might recognize it for a moment, but then the assumption will set back in, and you will continue then trying to find the answer and resolve it, and somehow through different ways. It's not always going to be the same solution that you're going to be striving for, but the common thread is you're looking for something, and that's the problem. It doesn't matter whether you incline up, down, left, right, front or back. The point is that inclination in and of itself is what causes birth, aging, death, all of what I said before.